Trends feel impossible to keep up with these days, and landfills are overflowing with the rise of fast fashion. Hi, my name is Ace, and today I want to share some of the ways I get the most wear out of my clothes and keep them out of landfills. If you're active on TikTok, then you've probably seen a few micro trends like these. Instead of buying a new closet every summer, you can use the items from your donate bag to create entirely new outfits. Barbie and Princess Charm School is a great example of this. One of my favorite movies when I was a kid. And speaking of when I was a kid, I learned how to sew when I was around 8 years old, and I never stopped. I learned from my grandma, my mom, books, and YouTube. So today I'm going to show you some basic beginner stitching techniques, how to sew buttons onto clothing, and general advice when sewing by hand. You will also need a needle and scissors. Measuring tape is recommended, but not necessarily required. The thickness of your needle also depends on the type of fabric you're stitching, according to sewguide.com. They have 10 types of hand sewing stitches. I will include that in the description. Thinner fabrics require thin needles. Thicker fabrics require thick needles. When sewing by hand or with a machine, you always want to match your thread to the fabric as closely as possible, unless you're aiming for a contrast effect like shown here. You can see the pink thread. So for this demonstration, I will be using a hot pink thread to make that easier for you to see. And the website recommends 30 inches of thread when sewing by hand. Personally, I would recommend less for a beginner, as too much thread can become overwhelming and tangle easily. I like to stay around like arm's length. I usually like where it's already folded over and around the length of one of my arms. And you want to go ahead and cut that. When threading your needle, you want to thread it all the way through to where both ends are touching. And you want to tie this in a knot. You can easily do that by, wrapping it around your finger and pulling that straight through. I lost one of them. That's fine. When I was younger, I frequently made the mistake of tying one end of the thread to the needle and then tying a really large knot to the other end. It ended up like snagging a lot of the fabric, and it's just wasn't ideal. And you might want to double or triple knot the end of your thread depending on the fabric that you're using. Thinner fabrics, usually you need to knot it less, but thicker fabrics, it'll slip through, at least in my experience. When you are finishing a stitch, you do not want to just go and do the same type of knot that you did for the end of your thread. You instead want to do 2 to 3 back stitches according to sewguide.com's example. So I'm going to show you a few simple and easy hand stitching techniques. Okay, so this is what a back stitch looks like. According to the website, this makes a very strong hand stitch. If you do not know anything, learn this. You can sew anything. Pull the needle through the fabric, take a stitch downward, then go forward the same distance beyond the first stitch, bringing the needle up again, like so. Sorry, try to grab that. Bring the needle down to the start of the first stitch. Continue in the same vein to get a long line of strong stitches. I know my lines aren't perfect, but, get better with practice, am I right? When you are finished sewing a back stitch, place the needle back towards the end of the most recent stitch that you've completed and pull that all the way through. And then flip your fabric over, or flip it inside out depending on what you're making, and anchor your thread to those back stitches that you just made by tying it 2 to 3 times over these back stitches, like so. Just pull it through and then pull your needle through that loop of the fabric that you just made, and do that 2 to 3 times. When you are finished, it should look something like this. And then you can take your scissors and cut your thread, and you're finished. Alright, next I'm going to demonstrate a whip stitch. So like the back stitch, you're going to insert your thread from the back or inside out, depending on whatever you're sewing. And with a whip stitch, it's much faster than the back stitch. You just pull your thread through, and this is usually used on the hem of some type of clothing. You pull the thread, and then you repeat. You can pull this thread tighter to make a kind of warped appearance to really secure that hem if you wanted to, or if you wanted more of like a looser, more frayed look, but to still keep the hem itself intact, you could also do a looser version as well. Here is a close-up of this patch that I showed you guys earlier. Here is that whip stitch. As you can see, I didn't use it on a hem. I wanted a dramatic look. Feel free to create in whatever way makes you the happiest. I really like how this turned out. I like the contrast and how tightly this is pulled. I don't know, I think it's super cute. This website has 10 total different types of stitching techniques. If you're interested in learning more, it is linked in the description below. Now onto the main course, putting those tools to use. How to stitch buttons onto clothing. WikiHow has a great step-by-step article on how to sew buttons on that I will be using as reference. The most common types of buttons are ones with 2 holes and buttons with 4 holes. When sewing on either type of button, always lay them out onto your fabric first to ensure visual appeal. Place a sewing pin under the button so it doesn't rotate. Always insert the needle from the inside of the fabric to hide the knot. Okay, so I have picked where I wanted to place my button, and now I'm going to take my thread and grab this, and I'm going to poke my needle through. Like so. And then in order to prevent the thread from being pulled too tight, I'm going to go ahead and insert a little needle right there. I do not know where my sewing pins are right now, unfortunately, so that's just gonna have to do. Go ahead and pull that tight, and then repeat this same motion until it is secured tightly. Alright, and when this is finished, before you tie the back of your thread off, WikiHow suggests that you pull your thread to where it's behind the button that you just did, and you wrap it 6 times. And then you go down here. And to close that off, we're going to use the same technique we did with the back stitch earlier, where you go ahead and pull that through, and you tie a nice tight knot. Do it 2 to 3 times. And there you go, you are all set. Your button is not going to go absolutely anywhere. It is for sure on there. When you stitch a button with 4 holes, you are going to start the exact same as you did with the 2-hole button. You're going to enter your thread from the back like so and pull it tight. But when you are stitching a button with 4 holes, stitch it like a cross or an X depending on the location of the buttonholes. So I'm going to start by going downwards first. Oopsies. I have to pull that tight. Okay. And then you can go across. Okay. And repeat this alternating motion until it is securely fastened. Once you have that securely fastened, we're going to do the same thing we did with the 2-hole button and pull this thread from behind, wrap it around the button 6 times. Okay, and then you want to go ahead and pull, or rather poke that back through. And then on the back here, this same thing with that back stitch, just pull it through some of that thread. All right. You can go ahead and tie it like this for an extra knot if you'd like to, but this is really not necessary. It's just a little personal tip from myself. If you want to make shirts like these, pants like these, or shirts like these, lay out all of your buttons first before stitching them on with the techniques that I showed you. Now that you know a few basics, how will you upcycle your closet?